Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming back to the Restart conference. My name is Wendy Mitchell. I am a contributing editor at Screen International. I'm thrilled to be moderating this session today. Today's topic is the power of accessibility. How can the film and TV industries better work with disabled cast and crew in front of and behind the camera? And this is a topic I've been trying to cover more and more as a journalist. I've written over the past 12 months for Screen a series of articles about this, looking at the success of Crip Camp, looking at how Slam Dance and their Unstoppable program really focused on the work of disabled filmmakers. And also wrote recently about the Disability Toolkit released by Forward Doc and Netflix, which is a great resource. So, as you know, Restart is all about, as we restart this industry after the pandemic, it's a great time to discuss how to make these industries more accessible. I hope our session today is not just about the why to do this, also about the how. So we're going to go big picture and hopefully some practical advice both. We have three amazing speakers with us today, representing different points across the film and TV industries and activism. We have Bryony Arnold, who is a freelance drama producer, formerly an exec at Tiger Aspect. She is the co-director of the group Deaf and Disabled People in TV. We also have Justin Edgar, who is creative director of 104 Films and also a director and producer. His credits include Large, We Are the Freaks, Special People, and The Marker. And last but not least, Adam Pearson, who is a presenter, actor, and campaigner. I'm sure most of you will recognize him from roles including Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin and Aaron Schimberg's Chained for Life. He also runs a consultancy called Kaleidoscope. So, three experts at different points in the value chain. We're so thrilled they could all join us today. Justin, I'd like to start with you because, gosh, I met you back when I started at Screen. You started 104 Films way back in 2004 as a production and training company specializing in disability and film. So I'm just curious a little bit about your journey. Does it feel like things have changed for the better since 2004?
I mean, that's the big question, I suppose, Wendy, isn't it? How much have things changed and what have we seen that is different? I have to say, about 10 years ago, I was at a conference called Diversify, organised by Screen International and Broadcast at BAFTA. And I was sitting there at the end of the line, the end of the panel next to people representing the other protected characteristics, you know, and disability always, it seemed like that metaphor really kind of being placed at the end of the line, because it seems like we are further down the kind of pecking order in terms of representation, you know, and inclusion. And what's changed in that 10 or that 15 years since we set up 104 Films, you know, it's we've had a massive thing happen in austerity and the 10 years of austerity that we had. We've had the Equality Act and the good things and the bad things about that. We have had generally a symbolic annihilation of disability and disabled talent in front of and behind the camera across industry. So what we tend to have is able-bodied people telling disabled stories. That seems to happen a lot. And I think that's the thing that really has to change in a big way. You know, we need to get directors' voices, writers' voices, and producers' voices, strong authorial voices behind. And that's when things already change, because really it's about depictions of disability and how we view disability. And we're not at the moment there yet with that. And sometimes disabled people are the worst people at depictions of themselves. You know, there are really damaging narrative paradigms that are adhered to, and you see every award season. We all know the offenders, and we still see a lot of cripping up. We still see stuff happening that just shouldn't be happening. But to be positive, you know, there is a lot of good stuff going on as well, and more young people are self-identifying as disabled than ever before, you know, and in the political sense and embracing the politics of disablement. And that's really, really important. Dear old Prince Harry coming out, you know, as having mental health issues. I think that's really helped people think about disability in a different way. And the fact that probably 70% of the 20% of us who have disabilities don't have like myself, don't have visible disabilities. Because before, I think there's been a tendency to think, oh, we need to get some disabled crew, or we need to work with disabled people on this program or show. They must be wheelchair users, or they must be visually impaired, or they must be culturally deaf, and that is not the case. So a lot of getting those numbers up and getting those industry numbers up, which we really still need to do, is about recognizing what disability actually is, and what a disabled person looks like. So it's kind of mixed message. I guess what's changed really, and the most exciting thing that's changed since that Diversify conference 10 years ago, is that people are sitting up and actually doing something now. And you see it across the board. Broadcasters, Netflix are doing great work. Katie Player there is a real force of nature. Yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm more hopeful now than I've ever been, actually. And I've kind of been doing this for 25 years, I suppose, and this is the best time, undoubtedly, without a doubt. So there's a lot to be positive about.
Oh, that's really great to hear. And yeah, I remember that Diversify conference very well. So yeah, hopefully we're moving beyond the same talk from 10 years ago and, seeing some action happening. Adam, from your perspective, I know you wear many hats, especially as an actor. I'm wondering, are the kinds of roles you're seeing come across your desk changing, or are you finding more work? How has your role as an actor been evolving?
Well, it comes down to what was just said about creeping up, and I think we need to get to a point where, in the same way that you wouldn't audition a non-female actor for a non-female role, or or for a female role, and like, for example, if they are remaking Crazy Rich Asians 2, and they need someone to play an 8-year-old Asian girl, I'm not going to get a phone call. And I'm completely okay with that, because those are beyond my protected characteristics. And that's what we're talking about here, protected characteristics. I'm not talking about only rapists playing rapists, or only dinosaurs playing dinosaurs. So if anyone's getting ready to tweet me that argument, put your phone down and do listen. And we need to get there. But we also need to get to a point where disabled talents, and that's the key word there, talent, can just get in the audition room and let their talent do the talking. And I don't think we're currently there. I think we have a landscape where casting directors can be a bit lazy and not know where to find disabled talent, so not bother looking. Or there's also a paradigm where we conflate the words disability and the words inability. And so until we can level that playing field and create environments that are accessible both physically and culturally for disabled actors to rock up and blow people away in the audition room, we're just going to be in this vicious circle where we get able-bodied actors playing disabled, because then that also sets the benchmark for how non-disabled people from the outside looking in view disability. It's okay for directors like Sia to make a movie about autism and then just brush their hands off and walk away. But the autistic community can't walk away, because that sets the cultural temperature for how the non-autistic community look at them. It shifts the lens of disability and changes people's focus and gives unrealistic narratives, expectations, and dare I say, caricatures of a very real-world group of people with their own thoughts, feelings, and opinions beyond the caricatures of cinema. And so I think we need to really look at how we cast and portray disability. But every now and then I do get a role that makes you go, aha, this almost has nothing to do with disability, and I'm just being seen as every other actor would be. And then you also get the kind of the cliches of either victimhood or villainy. I mean, we've got our third Bond bad guy in a row now with a facial disfigurement, which just befuddles me. Because I have a disfigurement, I must sit under a volcano listening to My Chemical Romance plotting the downfall of humanity, or try to burn Gotham to the ground on an almost nightly basis, like some kind of Pinky and the Brain-esque psychopath. And that feeds into where are all the disabled writers and directors. Who are better to write disabled stories and tell disabled stories than disabled writers, directors, and actors? To me, it's a complete no-brainer.
You mentioned to me earlier, you've got this consultancy company, and I'm curious how that consultancy is helping people do better or understand what steps to take to embrace disability in front of and behind the camera in a smarter way.
Absolutely. So I'm part of a group called Kaleidoscope. I'm part of the Kaleidoscope advisory wing, and we go into all sorts of companies, not just the media. We're currently we're talking to Sunderland Uni tomorrow, and we've got Sony and Microsoft also on board, and it's all about changing the culture. I think very often when people do D&I training, particularly around disability, it's often done by non-disabled people, and it's also often very narrow and almost monolithical, and it focuses on just, oh yeah, stick a ramp in, don't punch them, kind of happy days, and it tries to change what people think about disability, whereas what we try and do is go in and change how people think about disability. You go in, you honour what they're doing well, and then you read the room, you sort of get what the temperature is, and you ask them what their goals are and what they need. We use software called Mentimeter, and we address unconscious bias, things like that, and then lovingly talk people around and quell their anxieties. And it isn't just a kind of one and done hour training session. We have different sessions. We maintain constant dialogue with the companies, and we get feedback. And this has to be a constant quest for continuous improvement, mutually beneficial relationships, and ongoing dialogue that benefits everyone. And the thing that a lot of people don't realize is if you make the world more accessible for disabled people, you make it more accessible for everyone. If I get more accessibility, it doesn't give a non-disabled person less accessibility. And I think we think about accessibility in those very incorrect economic, better, worse off paradigms, when that isn't true. So that's what we try and do. Change how people think about disability rather than what they think about it.
And remind us how much the disabled community is worth. It's worth an astounding amount of economic power, right?
It is. So the Valuable 500 have a statistic that says 90% of companies care about diversity, but only 4% focus on disability. And the global disability market, the purple pound, that is the disposable income of disabled people, is $13 trillion.
It's astounding. That's trillion, people. Yeah, so this makes good business sense. Yes.
So
Bryony,
to put that into context.
Yes.
So to put that 13 trillion into context, that's more than the FA, the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, the MLB, the UFC, and the WWE combined.
So this is big business. Yes. Thank you for those stats. It's just astounding to hear. Bryony, I wanted to come to you next. You're a very experienced TV drama producer. You know, how is what Justin and Adam have said, how is that resonating with you? How have you found the industries to be evolving in terms of both access behind the scenes and also portrayal of disability on screen?
It's a really interesting one, and I've been in the industry now for, I'd say, over 15 years, and I think whilst there's some brilliant movement in some areas, we're still in the same place that we were when I first joined the industry. I think in terms of representation, we go through peaks and troughs. We seem to go through a period where all the soaps seem to have a disabled character, and then, for example, or we suddenly have a flurry of disability-related programs, and then it all disappears. And then maybe 2 years later, we start again on that trend. So I think the key thing is about representation. And when I say representation, I mean that in front of the camera and behind the camera. And in terms of, I'm a drama producer. I've worked in drama my whole career, and I'm I always describe disabled people in the industry as like exotic animals because we're so rare and few and far between. And you have to fight everything you have to do. If you want to be where you are in this industry, you have to fight for it. And it shouldn't be this hard a fight. And I've had so many people say to me, oh, you can't really do producing, can you? Because you're in a wheelchair and you're not going to be able to get around set, are you? And I'm kind of like, well, just watch me. And I think it shouldn't be that sense of I've got to prove myself, I've got to prove my worth, not only in my job, but then in my self-ability as well. So it's an interesting one. But I do think the last year there has been a shift. I do think people are listening more. I pray it's not lip service, because it normally is. And I do feel that in terms of representation across the board, there is a more willingness to learn and there's a willingness to try and do better. But the proof's in the pudding, it always is. And things like the BBC saying, we've got this 100 million of diversity, that is fantastic. But we also need to ensure going to the right places and actually on screen. But more importantly, is investing in people and their careers over the long term. Because the problem is there's so many training schemes, there's so many people who start to enter the industry and then they get lost for so many different reasons. And most of the time it's due to support and not having the right access needs met. And they end up leaving. We've lost so many brilliant, talented, disabled individuals because the system is not being set up properly and the support is not there. So I think in terms of what we're doing over deaf and disabled people in TV, I'm one of the 4 co-directors there. We are desperately trying really hard to try and make a positive change in terms of the longevity of these changes. We don't want another training course. No one wants another training course. What we want is proper sustainable jobs and work. We want to have long careers, and for someone like me who's had to fight to where I've got to now, I want to be able to give that back tenfold, and I want to see a new wave of people coming through and staying. That's the most important thing for me, is staying in our industry. We need those voices. God, do we need those voices? It's that thing of we just need a richness and complexity of story. And that story can only come through different voices. If it's the same voices all the time, it's always going to be the same programs that we're watching. So for me, it's also about ensuring that behind the camera, in front of the camera, there's such a richness of people, because that's where you're going to get the most brilliant, vibrant programs that will hopefully come to the forefront. So that's what I'm striving to do over the next part of my career.
Right. It sounds like very important ideas. And how do you have any ideas? I know we could talk about this for hours, but what could be some ways to support people, not just at that entry-level training scheme, but how do you help people have that staying power? Do you have the answer to that, or is that impossible to know?
I think it's a twofold thing. Actually, part of it has to come through production companies and broadcasters, the willingness to support people, but also the financial support, because we get a lot of disabled people who are afraid of declaring they are disabled because they're worried that they are they're going to be discriminated against ultimately. So there's that level of fear that we need to try and eradicate. Employers also need better training. Like, I can't remember who said it earlier, we're in a cafe culture of interviews. And stories that come out about who are asked the most inappropriate and elite in interviews is quite astonishing. There needs to be better training in terms of employment management as well, but supporting people, flexible working out, fantastic thing, but it needs to come from the indies and the broadcasters. And I know they like to point and go, oh no, but they need to do that over there. No, it's a collective thing we also need to be doing. But also it's people like me as a producer. When I start a job, I want to set a tone and I want to say, right, we're going to be doing this. We need to make that concerted effort to go and find the right people rather than just ringing our normal mates. And I get time is precious, time is money. when you're suddenly got a shoot that you've got to set up in a couple of weeks' time, you've got to find people incredibly quickly. So you perhaps don't have all the resources that you would like. But it's also just about finding those people. And they're there. The people are there. It's just finding them and supporting them. And I think that's just so crucial. And mentoring. I think mentoring is a really important thing as well for people coming through. And so that's something also in the group that we're really focusing on. But we're constantly having these conversations with all the indies and broadcasters about what are they doing? What are they doing other than just another training scheme? And when they send us jobs to advertise, perhaps do they need to be quite as rigid in ticking every box? Because actually, again, they're ruling out perhaps really brilliant people who are having to diversify because they don't tick one box. They're having to diversify their talents and their jobs. Because as a freelancer, you want to work. And so you'll do various different things. So you may not tick all those tick boxes that are on a job application. So it's also about ensuring that talent managers and the hirers are thinking slightly more exponentially and wider as well.
Great, thank you. Justin, I'm curious in listening to Bryony talk more about the TV side, how you would say the film side is tackling some of those same issues. And I think you've been involved as on the BFI's disability steering group, and maybe you were involved with their press reset campaign that launched in 2020. Can you tell us what the film industry is doing and what they need to do more?
Well, yeah, I mean, the film industry in terms of employment and access is still really the Wild West, and that's a big problem because we need to make it more accessible. And how do we do that when it's easy enough just to move on to the next person who doesn't have a disability and doesn't have the complications of being able to having to create an accessible set for them and an accessible workplace. So it's really difficult. But yeah, the BFI figures reflect it. I think the last set of inclusion statistics are 0% for writers and directors, producers backed by the BFI Film Fund. And we're not blaming the BFI for that, because the BFI are actually doing a really good job and are really progressive in terms of their attitudes towards disability. And Jen Smith, the head of diversity there, is great, and is doing outstanding work. But and the BFI admit they've got a problem. Now we've got Mia Bays in there, who's great, whose track record on diversity is sort of second to none. So hopefully things will start to change it a bit more, because the last 2 years of inclusion statistics have been terrible. So we're working a lot with them, and the press reset is part of that, trying to make things better, and trying to figure out ways of creating new opportunities and encouraging new disabled filmmaking talent. And I think, like I said before, really, it comes from the top. You've got to back those producers, directors, and writers, and you've got to give them the chance. I mean, it would be hard to think of a film with about Black people being made not by a Black director now. It would be really weird to think of that, wouldn't it? And certainly in high-end film and TV, I had an anecdote the other day. I was up for a job, actually, which I didn't get because I'm white, and because they were looking for a Black director. So it would be hard to imagine that happening. Yet it happens all the time in high-end TV and film and television. We're constantly faced by that. And part of the problem is when good films are made by able-bodied directors about disability, and I think we've seen quite a few of those lately. I'm sort of not going to name any names, but I think there have been some pretty good films, But those films don't have that sensibility, and they don't have the integrity. And we're moving towards an industry where that is really important. And actually, maybe the disabled director won't make as good a film or TV show as the more high-profile able-bodied director. But how are they going to get the chance, or how are they going to get the opportunities? And the project won't have that integrity. So I think that's really important. It has to come from the top. But also there are a whole range of problems we've got to look at in film, and because we work across film and TV really with the advisory group. And for instance, we're running a training program at the moment for screen skills for disabled post-production supervisors. And the wisdom behind that being that if you are a wheelchair user, or mobility issues, it's much easier to do a job like post-production supervisor, because there's a lot of paperwork involved, delivery stuff, which you can work on from home, especially these days. We had one of the participants on that who has a condition which can get better, can get worse. They get offered a job, they will lose their benefits. And then at the end of that job, because we live in a freelance world, what will be their support? They will have lost their benefits. They won't have better. So it's a much bigger question than just our industry, really. There's a whole bunch of employment stuff, and I am not an employment expert, but I think government and policy really need to look at that and say, well, there's no one size fits all, and there's a diversity within disability, and everybody will have different needs. Access to work doesn't work for everybody. Like I say, it's really the Wild West film, and you have to make provision as you go. But on the flip side of that is it's good that it's such a kind of malleable, pliable industry, because whichever film I've worked on, I've always had to address a bespoke set of issues or obstacles to get that film made, and then access just becomes another one of those factors that you have to factor in making the film. And we are incredibly good at doing that. We're incredibly good at problem solving, producers and directors in this industry. So I think that's really good. I mean, I've gone off subject a little bit, and I should say a little bit more about the work we do with Press Reset. And because it is incredible in terms of representation, we have decided that there will be no more BFI-backed films which feature cripping up, which is great. We've worked a lot with BAFTA, and the kind of recent changes that you've seen coming out of BAFTA have a lot of surrounding disability have come from the work we've done there. So it's been incredibly important, and hopefully we'll continue to do so. And what we've got now is a situation where I think we'll be advising filmmakers if they're making a film about disability, or something comes across a BFI's desk, which features disabled characters or is disabled talent, then we'll be able to give the benefit of our sort of experience and thoughts and knowledge to those filmmakers and feedback. So that's really positive. I mean, I wish everybody was doing that. If BBC Films were doing that and Film 4 were doing that, it would be absolutely great. So hopefully that will start to make a bit of an impact, and we'll really see people coming through, and we'll go from maybe 0% to, who knows, 5%. Well, the target is 7%, I believe. I might be wrong about that. Jen would probably correct me. I think we can get there within a couple of years if we work really, really hard and people just take that leap of faith a little bit. It's worked with ethnically diverse filmmakers, right? I mean, the figures are really good at the BFI now, and for ethnically diverse filmmakers and women filmmakers. So if we could do it with them, why can't we do it with disabled directors?
Yeah, Adam, I would love to hear a bit more from you, because I mean, I can't think of anything more freelance and unstable than being an actor. Obviously, you also do presenting, you work in documentaries, and you do training. But I think especially just the freelance nature of the industries, how does that complicate things?
Well, as a disabled actor, you've already got less roles available to you anyway, because disabled actors, disabled characters, not many people write disabled characters. When they do, they normally give them to able-bodied actors. But I also think, and it's something that Justin touched on really briefly, I think also disability is the one area of diversity that costs money to get right. We can all pretend that we're not racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and what have you. But to make your set accessible, you've got to put your money where your mouth is and make it accessible. To find those disabled directors, APs, sparks, fixers, you've got to sit down and sort of like put the graft in. So it costs money, it costs time. And I think people just don't want to do that. They want to take the path of least resistance. And that's where it all does start to feel a little bit lip servicey. But it's hard. Freelancing is hard anyway. And it's why, as was mentioned earlier, we lose a lot of good talent because they just don't have the support. We're very good at putting disabled people on schemes. and we're not good at putting disabled talent in careers in this industry, and that's what has to change. There needs to be more opportunities, better opportunities, and fairer opportunities. And we also need people who are disabled in positions of power and influence to be able to make those changes, see those changes through. And also we need to create a real strong culture of accountability, where we can say to the film companies and the TV channels and their creative diversity execs, here's what you said, here's what you've done. They are not the same. What you said and what you've done are poles apart. What are you going to do to fix this? And if you're not going to do anything to fix this, maybe you're not in the right job. And until that level of accountability happens, it's always going to be talking and panels and training schemes that just all really do my head in. I'm sure we've all been in like those ghastly diversity panels where you put Justin on the end just to tick the box and throw one question to him maybe at the end, just so we all know what he sounds like. And there's nowhere near enough accountability when it comes to disability and representation.
I mean, do you see that accountability being something that would be legislative? Do we need laws or more crafted around this, or something in the BBC's charter, or how can we make people more accountable?
Well, we already have legislation like the Equality Act and what have you. But then again, due to, as I said, the informal hiring nature of our industry, it makes it really difficult to enforce. We also lost the old 2-tick system, which guaranteed a disabled candidate an interview if they met the minimum criteria. And that was a place with disability confident, which doesn't do that. And this is just my opinion here, I think disability confident is worse than the old 2-tick system. And I also don't care how confident someone is about disability. I care how competent they are. Joey Essex is confident. So competence is a completely different wheelhouse altogether. And that's what we try and do with the training at Kaleidoscope and deal with it that way. But I think if you set targets, you have to hit them. And if you don't hit them, you have to say very clearly why. And until we hold people's feet to the fire a little bit and have those, because it's awkward. It's going to be awkward sitting people down and saying, you have failed the disabled community, would you mind telling me why? But I think it's a conversation that absolutely needs to happen and needs to happen more often. Otherwise, it all just becomes a little bit kind of double thumbs up, disability is great, and we all listen to, I don't know, REM, Shiny Happy People, and accept it as normal, when it isn't normal and it isn't okay.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. We've got to get past this sort of virtue signaling into real work. And speaking of real work, there's been some great news just announced with Bryony on a project with Jack Thorne. And Bryony, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the project and why it's so important to you and why you think it's been able to get off the ground now.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful project. Working title still, but it's called at the moment Independence Day / Piss on Pity. We're working on it. But yeah, it's written by the incredible Jack Thorne and the marvellous Genevieve Barr, who are just fabulous and amazing and talented to work with. And it's a single drama for BBC Two and Netflix. And it's basically essentially surrounds a couple who met on the comedy circuit, who were both disabled, and then they both set out to help change and create disability civil rights in the 90s. And it's just actually a really poignant, beautiful, funny, punky, anarchic script. And as a disabled practitioner in this industry, I've always wanted to work on something surrounding disability, and for many different reasons it's never quite happened. And when this came across my desk, I was so excited and I jumped at the chance to work on it. But unfortunately with COVID, the beast that it is. It's been delayed so much, but finally now we are going to be filming in July. And the beautiful thing and the groundbreaking thing about it is that we are trying to encourage as many disabled talent behind the camera and in front of the camera. We want to make it feel incredibly inclusive. So there's multiple ways of trying to achieve that. We've been really practical with both BBC and Netflix and said, look, as Adam said earlier, it's going to cost more in terms of access requirements. A ramp for me just to get in the production truck is not a cheap day at the office. Disabled toilets, they are not cheap. All these extra things we need to think about. I want to ensure that they are there for people. So we've asked them to help us support that, which they are doing, which is great. Because we didn't want it coming out of everybody else's usual budget. We want to make sure the budget is for making the programme itself. And why should it be spent on access needs? That's just to get everybody to do their job properly. So that's been wonderful. And we're now starting the casting process, which is fantastic. So it's been a long journey, but we're just so excited to be telling this really unique story, and hopefully made and created by disabled people, but also just making it accessible for a non-disabled audience. That's the really key thing. We want to bring people into this fascinating, punky world, and make it understandable and accessible and beautiful. So I'm just, I'm really, really excited about it. I mean, it's going to be tough as nails, I'm not going to lie, the next few months. But that's what TV is. That's what we all come to expect nowadays. It's all part of the fun. But no, I'm just thrilled to be part of it. It's really, really exciting.
No, it sounds great. And I think that's such a key point about the audience. You know, a story about a disabled person doesn't have to just feel like it's a Hallmark card. You know, one thing I loved about Crip Camp is that film is so sort of rock and roll and energetic, and it's not, yes, it's inspiring, but it's not this cliched, cookie cutter, romanticized look at what might be inspiring about the disabled community. It's how that community really is, because it was made, you know, within that community. And I think you can tell that. Justin, I'm curious what kinds of projects you're working on. And I know not all of them are about disability, because if you're a Black filmmaker, you don't only have to make films about Black people. So can you tell us anything you're working on and how you're trying to think about crewing up or casting being inclusive?
Well, yeah, I mean, interestingly, we made a short last year with Reef Madeley, who I believe is going to be in Piss on Pity, and it was incredible the trouble we had finding accessible spaces to film in for that short film. You know, it's really so I appreciate what Bryony's saying. You know, sometimes it's not cheap, and it's, you know, when the BFI gives you quite a small budget for to make a short film, you know, it is difficult on that. So the budget really comes into it quite heavily, I think. You know, we have to influence that. But yeah, 104, we carry on doing what we're doing, you know, and we're increasingly working with exciting people, you know, and having good conversations with all sorts of people across industry about the work that we do. You know, the training work we do continues to be funded by the likes of BFI, Creative England, Screen Skills. We're looking at ways of moving into making things more accessible online as well. We're developing an app called Access Player, which we're working with some film distributors on, and that is to make screen content more accessible above and beyond the usual kind of features you would have, such as closed captions and audio description. So we're looking at things like viz caps for people with learning disabilities, trigger warnings for people with common mental health issues, common trigger warnings, all sorts of stuff. And if there is an accessible version which people need, they can email us through the app and say, yeah, you can you have a low contrast sensitivity version, low contrast vision sensitivity version, which somebody suggested to us, you know, which a lot of people have, you know. So we're working on that side of things as well. I'm continuing to push forward all my projects, you know, and I've got various projects. I'm lucky enough to have had a pretty good career as a director, you know, in terms of a film. and trying to do more TV projects now. And that's a really difficult thing to do, actually. Sometimes it's really difficult to cross over from film to television as a director, probably because in some ways it's more difficult, I think, for disabled writers, directors, and producers working in TV than film, because I think there's a bit of a closed shop and a bit of a misunderstanding about disability. So that continues to be a kind of barrier. But, you know, all positivity going forward. I think there is a big change in thinking, and the conversations we're having with people and coming to talk on, hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll come and talk on Diversify 3 or whatever it might be, organised by Broadcasters Screen International. We won't be talking about trying to get in there. We'll be talking about being in there and what we do next. And I think that'll be the next stage.
Oh, I love that vision. I hope we do that. We have to wrap up on time. Obviously, we could talk more in depth about so many of these issues for hours. We recognize that. We're just sort of touching on a few things here. I wanted to see if we could end by each of you just saying one thing that might help somebody in the industry who's watching this panel and wants to do better or wants to learn more. And I'm going to start by saying, earlier in 2021, there was this toolkit for disability in the film industry, published in the UK by Doc Society with Forward Doc, and Netflix backed it a bit. And I think it's probably not a flawless document, they would say that, but it really gives a lot of ideas to think about and some tips on what to do. So I think that can be a good primer for people to start with. And the brilliant Lindsay Dryden wrote a lot of that. So I would say go check that out. It's a free PDF. Just Google, you can find it. But Adam, what would be one quick thing somebody can do to help this industry do better?
If we always do what we've always done, we're always going to get what we've always got. And change is a big thing. Change is scary, change is awkward, change is uncomfortable. I hate change. But I think it's very easy to lose sight on the fact that when it comes to diversity, we all want the same thing and we all want to do better. So let's all have the awkward conversations we have to, make the baby steps that we have to, and be the change that we want to see in our industry. And together, I'm sure we'll get there and it'll be great.
Very positive. Thank you. Bryony, can I ask you, what's one thing, one idea?
I would say it's have a conversation. There's a level of fear and an ignorance because of fear. And I would say I wouldn't say go and speak to the nearest disabled employer that you have, because that may not be the right thing to do. But what I would say is engage with one of our organisations. Any one of us here on the panel, we're all part of amazing, brilliant organisations. Come and have a chat with us. We'll be brutally honest with you about what you need to be doing and how you can make things better and how you can be moving things forward in a positive way. Just let's start that conversation. And I think don't be afraid of making mistakes. We'll make mistakes, but it's about having good positive intentions and then putting your money where the mouth is, basically. But please just come and talk to any of the organisations that are out there. Dank is another brilliant one as well, or Sam Tatlow at ITV, or Ali Castle at Channel 4. They're all amazing people to talk to who will give you honest, brilliant advice.
Yeah. And as Justin mentioned, Jen Smith at the BFI would also be glad to talk to some people about this, I'm sure. Absolutely. So Justin, the final word with you. What would be one idea to help people make change?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I would say to the change makers in the industry is mainstream culture survives and thrives on the fringes, and you have to embrace those fringes. It's what keeps us going as an industry and what keeps the creativity of the industry going. So don't be afraid to embrace disability. And disability is also bigger than if you're a wheelchair user, if you're visually impaired, if you're culturally deaf, it's bigger than that. And try to educate yourself about what disability is and embrace it. You might actually be disabled yourself. You might not realize it or identify that way, but you might be. And that might be a way you could connect to some really amazing material. So invest yourself in it, and talk to people as well.
Yeah. It's brilliant advice from all three of you. Thank you so much for joining us. So as the expert said right there, talk about it, listen, learn, invest. There's lots of ways that we can make this industry better. So I really wanted to say a huge thanks to Adam, to Justin, to Bryony for joining us today. We know we could talk for many more hours about this. They could each give us a half-day masterclass on what they know, but we really wanted to start this discussion, and I'm so glad we've been able to welcome you here today. Thank you so much for your time, for your good work. I hope we can come back next year and have a case study on Piss on Pity and its huge success. So best of luck with all your work, and thank you again for joining us. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in to Restart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.